We're talking today with Mr. Albert Eitel of Middleville, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Eitel, can you start by giving us some background on yourself? To begin with, where and when were you born?
I was born in Scottsbluff, Nebraska, Christmas Day, 1926, on a farm.
Right. Now, did you grow up there or did you move later?
No, my parents moved to Flint, Michigan when I was almost 4 years old.
Okay.
So they came to Flint, Michigan, 1929 or 1930.
Mm-hmm.
And I was about 4 years old.
Okay. Now, why did they move to Michigan?
Well, for work, money.
Okay.
And the auto industry was going great in Flint. So my dad came to Flint and got a job with GM right away.
Now, did he get to keep that job in the 30s because of the Depression
Yes, he
hits?
did.
Yeah.
He kept that job and retired in, 1943, 44, he retired from Buick in Flint.
And do you know about how old he was at that time?
Oh, Dad was probably 65, 67 in that area.
Okay, so he was pretty old when you were born then.
Well, let's see. Probably, I can't recall, but he was not a young man, let's put it this way.
And how many
I was
kids?
the last of the 6 children.
Okay, 6 children, you're the last of them. All right.
And we were all 5 years apart.
Okay. Now, how much schooling did you get?
I went through high school, yes.
Okay. And when did you graduate from high school?
Well, I would have graduated. I did not. I went into the service at age 17, and I was in the last half of the 11th grade.
Okay. Now, to go back a little bit, you're in school, you're a school kid and so forth. Before Pearl Harbor happened, before the Japanese attacked, did you have any idea of what was going on in the world? There was a war in Europe, that kind of thing?
Well, we kind of watched the war in Europe, but we didn't know what was going on in the South Pacific at this time. That was later. We did kind of follow the war in Europe, the campaigns, Russia and Germany and,
Right.
and Czechoslovakia and so forth.
Yeah. How did you get your information then?
Well, radio. There was no TV then, just radio and newspapers.
Would you go to the movies and see newsreels?
Oh, what's that?
How about newsreels at the theater?
Yes, they had quite a bit of the action going on in the war.
All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yes, we were in church on Sunday afternoon, and somebody came in and interrupted the church service and said, the Japanese attacked USA in Pearl Harbor, and they went on to describe what was on the radio. They had heard it on the radio, and they come into church and told us, and that's how we found out, yes.
Okay. Now, at the time that happened, did you think the war was going to be over before you got in it, or?
Yes, all us young fellows, that's the way we were thinking. Oh, we got to get in there right now because, and that was actually the young fellows' thoughts. I've got to get over there, get in this war before it's over. I want to help.
Okay. Now, but you're still too young for that at that point. So,
Yes.
what were you? So, did you do anything then before the time you enlisted to sort of help the war effort in one way or another?
Well, we helped with whatever was going on, and with the rationing, we all obeyed the rules with the rationing because we thought it was important to do this.
Did you do things like collect scrap metal or paper or stuff like that?
We did in the schools, yes. Like you say, the paper drives and so forth, this type of thing.
Okay. Now, when did you enlist?
I enlisted in May of 44.
Okay. And how
May
old?
2nd of 44.
And how old were you at the time?
17 and 3 months or 4 months.
Okay. Now, why did you decide to enlist at that time?
Well, I wanted to enlist when I was 16 years old. Well, I knew I couldn't. So the minute I turned 17, I started pestering my parents. you've got to sign this for me because I'm going to join the Navy. You got to sign that. My dad, he's Russian German, didn't speak much English. Not yet, no, you're too young. You stay home, you're too young.
Did you have any brothers who were in the service?
Yes, I had an older brother in the service. He was in the Air Force. And finally, I convinced my parents it was quite safe for me to go into the Navy. I wouldn't be on the ground fighting with the Army. I would be in the Navy.
Okay. Now, why did you choose the Navy?
I don't know, really, truthfully. I was up to the shipyards in Bay Cities. I saw the ships they were building, and I don't know if that stuck in my head or what, but it seemed I was on a ship, it would be better than the Army. I don't know why, but that was my thought.
Okay. All right. So now, once you enlist, take me through the process. You go to a recruiting office and sign up. What do you do?
Well, yes, my friend and I, we went to the recruiting office, probably 4 or 5 times. One week we'd go, then we'd wait a week, and then we'd go again. We'd find out the information. You have to go to Detroit for physical, come back to Flint for a few days, and then go off to camp.
And where do they send you for basic training?
Basic training was Great Lakes, Illinois.
Okay. Now, how would you describe that base? How big was it? What did it look like?
Oh, the base was huge. I mean, it was probably 2 miles long. It was huge, huge base. Many, many buildings and many, many people. Thousands.
Now, what did they make you do? What did the training consist of?
Our training, well, all type of physical training, exercises and walking, running, and training, all types of physical. And of course, they'd get you up maybe once a month in the middle of the night for a little, just to run around for a half a mile or so, or march for 2 or 3 miles, then you could go back to bed. But just to show you that the middle of the night was no different than the daytime.
How much emphasis did they put on discipline and following orders and that kind of thing?
A lot of training on discipline, yes, following orders, discipline. Very important, and it was very important.
Now, was it easy for you to adjust to the Navy, or did it take a while?
Well, it takes a while, but eventually it comes, it gets into your head.
Okay. Now, the men who were training with you, were they pretty much all from Michigan, or were they from all over the place?
They were mostly from Michigan, but there were others from Ohio and Indiana and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't form a crew until later, after the basics.
Right.
And then when we had a crew formed, we went to Camp Bradford, Virginia for some training. That was basic amphibious training, landing ships and so forth. And that's where we saw our first LST and went on board to learn. Okay. And we did some anti-aircraft training, shooting at targets and so forth, and made a few landings on the beach in Norfolk, Virginia, just to learn how the ship operated, to open the doors, take some trucks out of the tank deck out to shore and back, just to learn basics.
Okay. Was Camp Bradford the first place you went after basic training?
Yes.
Okay. So
Yes.
you go there, and then when you were training there, did you train just in LSTs, or did you learn something about the other landing craft?
Just LSTs. They were forming an LST crew.
Mm-hmm.
So when they formed that, that's what we trained on.
Okay. Now, at this point, did you get any more specialized training for particular duties on the ship, or were you
Yes,
all doing the same thing?
I was trained on a twin 40 millimeter gun,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd shoot at sleeves behind the plane. That was our target practice, and it was quite interesting, really, and fascinating, something different and quite powerful, really. You get it in your head. Hey, this is it.
All right. Now, how long were you at Camp Bradford, do you think?
Oh, several weeks. I don't recall exactly. I know I was there through through Thanksgiving, I had a menu here of the, and probably 6 or 8 weeks.
Yeah, so you're a couple months in basic training and then a
say.
couple months over in Virginia after that.
Yes, I would say a couple months.
Now, when you were at Camp Bradford, would they let you go off the base or go into Norfolk, or did you just stay there?
I think I got off the base 2 or 3 times in the 6 or 8 weeks I was there. Yes, we did get off the base on a weekend pass, like a Saturday and a Sunday.
Now, what could you do then if you were off the base?
Well, go into town and go to the movies, whatever. Try to go to the bar. You know, we were 17 years old. We were pretty big shots. We were in the Navy now. So we would do everything a young fellow wants to do or try to do.
Okay. Now, once you complete the training at Camp Bradford, now, do they send you to your ship, or what happens next?
No, after Camp Bradford, we went back to Great Lakes, Illinois, and we trained some more. And after about 2 weeks of that, we were training as a crew then. We were crew number 4580. And after that, we got on a train to go to southern Indiana to pick up our ship, where it was built at the shipyard in southern Indiana. That's where we picked up our ship, the 596, at southern Indiana, and then we went down the Mississippi to New Orleans.
Okay. Now, what was your assignment then in the crew? Were you just a seaman at this point?
Oh, I was a deckhand.
Okay.
I was seaman first class, deckhand, at that time, yes.
All right. Now, so then you got to sail the LST down the Ohio and down the Mississippi?
Down to Mississippi,
So
Louisiana.
What do you remember about the trip on the rivers?
It was quite interesting, really. We saw many barges, and you had to allow room for the barges. And several nights going down, we had to anchor overnight because of the fog. It was too close in the river. You know, you're only like 50 yards apart, and you got a 200-foot barge trailing onto a tugboat, and it's quite close. So several nights we had to anchor in the river overnight till the fog lifted.
About how long did it take you to get down to New Orleans?
Oh gee, I think we were on the river a week or 10 days, because we anchored overnight at once or twice I think. So it took us a couple of days long. I think about 9 days.
Now, did you stop at New Orleans or did you keep going?
No, we stopped at New Orleans, Louisiana, and Alexandria. We went on leave there. We had a weekend off here and there, and we enjoyed Louisiana, Alexandria, and New Orleans. We enjoyed New Orleans.
Oh. Okay. Now, how did the people there treat you? Did they?
Well, they were quite cordial, yes. Yes. Yeah, they were quite cordial in New Orleans and Alexandria. Yeah, they were very nice to us.
Now, did any of the men in the crew get in trouble?
Oh, there's always one or two gets in trouble. But it's just a lockup overnight, you know, for having a couple drinks when you shouldn't have and so forth. But in general, no troubles.
Okay. What sort of people did you have as officers? Were they older men or mostly pretty young too?
Our first captain was a man of probably 45 years old. He'd been in the service for 10, 15 years. Our second captain, now he'd been in the Navy for probably 30 years. And he was an old salt, and he wanted you to know it. And he let us know it. But it was educational. We learned.
Okay.
We learned from somebody that knew.
Right. Okay, so you get down to New Orleans. Did you just stay there a couple of days, or you stay longer than that?
I think we were in and out of New. We went out into the Caribbean for more exercises, more gunnery practice, and general knowledge of the ship. How to beach a ship and open the doors and unload and load. Yes, we trained for another couple of weeks.
Okay. And then after that, now do you go to sea?
Well, I say like 2 or 3 weeks we trained. Then we came back to Alexandria, and we left. We left from there for the South Pacific, but we went through the Panama Canal across to get to the Pacific.
Okay. Now, did you get to be up on deck when you went through the canal? Could you see what was going on?
Oh yes, yes. On our off hours, yes, we always wanted to see the trains pulling the ship through the canal, and so it was interesting. And we also had liberty on a foreign soil the first time in the Navy. That was our first foreign liberty.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember what the name of the city was at the end of the Panama Canal.
Well, you've got Panama City on one end.
Panama City on one end.
And
Yes.
Cologne is on the other.
I can't remember.
Yeah. Okay. But you did get to do that. Then, now, were you still just a deckhand at that point? Or
Yes, I was the deckhand all the way across. It took us about a month and a half, 6, 7 weeks to cross the Pacific.
Okay.
Of course, our ship top speed was like 10, 12 knots, which isn't much. That's 15, 16 mile per hour.
Now, when you were in the Pacific, did you sail by yourself or were you in a convoy?
No, there were 2 or 3, I think there were 3 of us LSTs going across at the same time. That was our convoy going across the Pacific, yeah.
Did you have any escort ships or were you?
Escort, not when we left the States. When we got over to the islands, yes, we joined a few more. We had a few destroyer escorts and destroyers, and yeah.
Okay. Now, was it an easy crossing of the Pacific? I mean, was the weather good or?
The weather was bad. It was kind of rough at times. Of course, 17 years old, you've never been away from home before. It was kind of rough. So the first few weeks wasn't very pleasant.
How many of the men got seasick?
There were quite a few of the guys. Fortunately, I was not one. But when I'd see some of the stewards mates, some of the cooks and so forth, with a platter of sandwiches for the guys on duty, they would heave over the side and forget the sandwiches. It wasn't funny at the time. It was not funny, but I would say half the crew got seasick.
Okay. Now, what's it like to ride on an LST when you've got rough seas?
It's very rough. It is very rough. LST is a very short ship, small, 300 foot long, 50 foot wide. And when you got swells 20 and 30 feet high, it was rough. It would shake, the whole ship would vibrate when it hit the waves, you know. And it was a rough ride.
Okay. So these are flat bottom ships, aren't
Yes.
they? So you go up in a wave and
Up
slap down?
on top, slap down on it.
Okay. Now, did you lose anything overboard in a storm or did stuff blow away?
No. Oh no. We secured everything. Everything was tied down with long, big hawsers, big ropes.
Now, during the crossing, did you have a lot of stuff up on the decks or was it all below?
Not necessarily. Most of it, everything was below on the tank deck, except for the LCT, secured down. And that was secured down with chains, and so it was safe. It was.
And can you describe what an LCT is?
Beg your pardon?
Can you tell us what an LCT is?
LCT, that's a small landing craft, about 100 feet long, and they usually have a crew of maybe 18 to 20 men, and an officer, of course, in charge of the crew, and they usually could carry maybe 2 or 3 tanks, and 20, 30 men to land on the beach.
Right. So it's bigger than the little boats they use to land just soldiers. so it can
Yes,
carry,
yeah. It was
several
like
tanks.
100 foot long,
Yeah.
96 or 98 feet long.
And so you're carrying this on the deck of the LST.
It was up on top of the main deck.
All right.
It was on a kind of a wooden cradle, and then it was chained down. Yeah.
Okay. Now, yeah, as you crossed the Pacific, did you have ceremonies for things like crossing the equator or crossing the date
Oh
line?
yes, crossing the equator was a very important ceremony. It was, well, they called you pollywogs before you crossed the equator. After you crossed the equator, you were a shellback. you were seasoned then, according to the rules of the Navy, you know, the folklore and so forth. And it was quite interesting. It was a little scary at times too. They wanted this to set this in your mind, a little scariness, like drinking some motor oil. Actually, it was probably Mazola oil or Wesson oil or something of this sort, or a vegetable oil. But they blindfold you, and you don't. How do you know what it is? It was just things like this type.
Okay. Now, your boat crossed the equator back and forth several times.
Yes.
So once you were a shellback, now, did you just watch, or did you help with the ceremony?
We would create a ceremony for the new deckhands that hadn't crossed the equator
Right.
yet. Yes, we done that 3 or 4 times that I know of, and it was interesting. Now you're the shellbacks now, and you're initiating some new.
Okay, new crewman. Okay. Now, once you cross the Pacific, where do you go first? What places are you stopping at?
Well, I don't even remember the first island, but we went to. Oh, gee.
So I think in your log there, I think the first place you land is in the New.
Beg pardon?
I think you go to the New Hebrides first. So Espiritu Santo. Just a,
We went through the Panama Canal, went Pacific to the New Hebrides Islands, yes, in the South Pacific. That was our first island stop.
okay. Now at this point, are you loading or unloading, or just refueling, or? Well,
We were. I think we were still on a shakedown cruise, more or less, because we traveled several islands there. Russell Island, New Georgia, Bougainville, and the Solomon Island group. And we just traveled to 3 or 4 islands there for about a month until we got accustomed to the ship and so forth.
now, just for a moment here, let's pause a little bit. You've got a diary there, a kind of a logbook. You kept track of where you were. Now, were you enlisted men are not really supposed to do that, are they?
No, we weren't supposed to do that.
So how was it that you wound up keeping a diary?
Well, I'll tell you what, I was helping the storekeeper out. This was the battery log for our auxiliary batteries.
Okay.
We had to keep them charged in case of emergencies. And the front 20 or 30 pages, I kept the dates when we charged them up and so forth. Finally, I started back about halfway back in the book here, writing down where we were going today and tomorrow, and pretty soon I started marking down where we were going, almost unconsciously, but I kept the log book up too.
Okay. Now, how did you wind up working with the storekeeper?
Well, I believe he was sick for a couple of weeks, and he couldn't complete the job he was supposed to do in the office and so forth. So I started helping him in the office, and pretty soon I asked the officer in charge of this division if he thought I could be the permanent helper in his office and do this job. It was much better job than deckhand, let's face it. It was much better than scrubbing bulkheads and painting the ship. So anyway, this officer, he thought about it for about a week or two. Then he says, we do need a hand. He says, you can stay permanently and help him. So I had a job, but I was still a deckhand. I was still seaman first class. So I mentioned to him that I should have a rating if I'm working in the. So he gave me the storekeeper 3rd class rating after I was working in the office for about 3 months. So that's how I got into the storekeeper division.
Okay. Now, in this period there where you're kind of sailing around the South Pacific, you're going, this is mostly kind of tropical islands and areas like that. What do you remember about that, whether it's the weather
Well,
or the places you stopped at?
we would go to one place to pick up our water and our fuel. Then we'd go to another island, maybe a day or two away, to pick up some tanks and trucks and men. We'd take them to another island. It wasn't an invasion. Usually it was just to drop them off at this island, maybe to build an airfield, which they were doing a lot at that time, building airfields, because we needed airstrips to get closer to Japan. And we were advancing to the north and to the south, or to the north and to the east,
Okay.
towards closer to Japan. And that's what we would do. We would haul a shipload of tanks and trucks and men to these different islands, and they would complete their work and still had tanks and armor to protect them on the islands.
Right. And were you going up to the Philippines to deliver these things?
We were heading toward the Philippines, yes. The Philippines were a big step closer to Japan. And that's what we were doing,
Because
hauling men to these islands.
right. This is mostly sort of the first half of 1945 then that
Yes,
we're talking about.
first half.
So there was still fighting going on in the Philippines and there's
Oh, yes.
and so forth at that
There were
time.
many Japanese in the Philippines. Oh boy, hundreds and thousands.
And you went to different places in the Philippines. You
Oh,
went to
yeah.
Leyte, you went to Samar, you went to Manila.
Samar, Tacloban, Leyte, and the sea, and the there was this big battle off the Philippine Islands, and it was a dangerous place to be. But we had a lot of big ships in there, carriers and a lot of destroyers and carriers in there. And they really done a job.
All right.
Sank a lot of Japanese ships. Oh, them
Now,
guys.
now, could you see any of the sort of effects of the battle or damage or sunken ships?
Usually the day after, yes. Yeah.
Because you've got some pictures of things like sunken Japanese ships and
That was in Manila Bay, yes. The harbor at Manila.
Now-
The American ships sunk a lot of Japanese ships there. Oh, I heard 90, 100, and so forth. You know, you hear different tales. But I saw 8 or 10 of them sticking up out of the water, so I saw the results of some of it.
Now, did you go into Manila at any point?
Yes, we did.
And what did you see there?
Manila had been bombed quite heavily by then, and there were a lot of buildings knocked down, but it was still a nice city yet. Manila must have been a pretty city before the war, because they had a lot of nice buildings, and they were partially destroyed and so forth, but you could see what you were.
Right. Did you see much of the civilian population when you were in the Philippines?
Oh yes, yeah. And in the down below, away from Manila, in Leyte and Samar and Tacloban and so forth, they were mostly just villages. And a lot of it was still mud huts. I mean, it was not modern like our country. You know, it was still islands. And actually, outside of Manila, the Philippines were a backward country compared to our country. There were no automobiles in these little villages. Not one. There was not one automobile there. They still used the horses and wagons and walked.
Okay. Now, did any of them work for the Americans or sell them things or anything like that?
Well, they helped us out quite a bit. I mean, information and so forth, and they were good people. The Philippines, they helped us out, and I know they didn't help the Japanese out because that was the first thing they told us: no Japanese. So it was apparent that the Japs were not very nice. Well, they were the conquering soldiers, you know. It made a difference. They told them what to do, when to do it. Now, the Americans were not like this to the Philippines. We had not conquered. We were there to help them, and that's the way it was. So they appreciated our help, and they helped us.
Okay. Now, do you remember where you were when the war with Japan ended? You know, when the atomic bombs came down, and it's going to be mid-August.
August of 45,
Yeah.
wait a minute.
Let's see if you got that in there. Because you got a picture that's labeled that says being V-Day.
I was in a small village called San Fernando, Luzon, in the Philippine Islands. August. August 15th. In the Lingayen Gulf. San Fernando Valley, Luzon,
Now-
Philippine Islands.
Now, do you remember hearing about the atomic bombs being dropped, or did you just hear about the end of the war?
Well, they didn't say anything about the bomb being dropped at this time, but we heard about it after the war, yes.
Okay. What was the reaction on your ship when they announced the end of the war?
Oh, it was great. It was great news, yes. You know, they were talking about the war ending August 3rd, August 5th, August 8th, August 13th, and then August 15th we heard, and everybody said, oh boy, we're going home.
But you weren't going home yet, were
We
you?
weren't going home for a long while yet.
Yeah. What did you do then after, what did your ship do after the
After
war
the
ended?
war, oh, we were still in the Philippines, Leyte. September 20th, we hit Okinawa this morning.
Now, what did you see when you got to Okinawa? Could you see wreckage of the harbor or anything like that, or just a big base?
I didn't even mark down what we had 300 troops on board. We were going to Jinchen, Korea.
Okay,
This was September 24th.
right. Okay, so now was Korea the first place you went on the mainland of Asia?
What was that?
Well, was Korea the first place you went that was on the Asian mainland? 'Cause it
Oh,
did-
yes,
Okay.
yes. Korea was one of the first. Yes.
What do you remember about Korea from when you got there?
Cold. Korea, it was kind of backward, but not like the southern Philippines. But they were kind of modern compared to the islands anyway. Compared to the islands, they were quite modern, yes. There were a few Japanese cars there and so forth, and they did have some streets.
Now, were there still Japanese soldiers around at that point? Or?
Yes, there were, but they wasn't terrifying or anything.
Oh.
They were quite mild and common. They were quite friendly at that time.
Now, did you get to see any of them, or?
Oh yes, yeah, we saw them off a ways, but we didn't associate with them or try to talk to them. Well, you can't talk to them.
Okay. So what do you think? What were the jobs that your ship was doing then in those months? Where are you going and what are you doing? You take some troops to Korea.
After the war.
Yeah.
Yes, we were more or less taking the soldiers back home to Korea and Japan and even Chinese troops. We took some Chinese troops back to China.
What was it like having these men on your ships? What impressions did you
It was
have?
quite interesting, really. I talked to quite a few of the officers. A Jap colonel, he says, he was educated at the University of California. He said, I lived there for over 4 years. And a very smart man, doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And I talked to some majors and other colonels in the Japanese Army. Very smart men, very smart. Well, they were all college educated. I was a high school graduate. They were smart people, and I could visit with them, and they spoke English as well as I did.
Did they say much at all about the war, or did they talk about other things?
No, they didn't care to even talk about it, really. I asked a couple of them, how was your life in the service here with the Japanese Army? Were they good to you or bad to you? They didn't want to answer that. They didn't want to say good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
So it was interesting talking to them. They were very educated men, though.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very smart.
Okay. Now, what other places did you visit?
Oh, golly. Oh, Southern Korea, Kyushu, oh,
So Kyushu, Japan?
now Sashu, southern tip of Korea is an island, and we picked up 1,400 Japanese to take to Sasebo, Japan.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one of our first trips of hauling Japanese troops home.
Right. Now, did you get to go ashore in Japan, or did you stay on the boat?
Oh, well, we could have, but we didn't because we were there only a matter of hours. Matter of a few hours. We unloaded 1,400 Japanese troops, and then we went to Okinawa.
Okay. Now, did you also get to China?
Well, yes, we were in Shanghai
Mm-hmm.
a couple of times, but just for a day or so, and then we'd set off for one of the islands again. We done a lot of that. We were hauling troops back to Korea and to China. Well, Tsingtao, China, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We picked up a load of Japanese troops at Tsingtao, China. 1,000. This time it was 1,000 Japanese civilians
Mm-hmm.
aboard. We were taking them back home to Kyushu, Japan. Then we went back from Kagoshima, Japan to Tsingtao, China again to pick up more people.
Did you get to meet many of the Chinese people?
Well, we met a few, but very few of them could speak English. A few of them did speak a little bit, but to hold conversations with them was kind of hard. Yeah.
But did you get to buy souvenirs there, or take rickshaw rides, or things like that?
Yeah, yes, we did. We did get ashore, and like you say, a few souvenirs. We did buy silk vests and so forth, and it was quite interesting compared to our country. You know, you see so much difference, and you learn a little bit.
Okay. Now you also got down to French Indochina,
Yes,
what's now Vietnam. Do you remember anything about that?
Yes. French Indochina, when we went ashore to get mail, the orders were from fleet headquarters, you go ashore armed. So I had an armed guard to take me ashore and I had to wear the 45 to go ashore to get the mail, because the French troops were still in town. They were still actually skirmishes. They weren't actually a big battle, but they were still fighting for control.
Right.
And the French ruled French Indochina for I don't know how many years. I find after the war, I read a little bit about this, Oh boy, we were there. We saw these. In fact, I bought a gun from from a French soldier. Yeah. While in French Indochina, which I couldn't even bring home. But you try, you think.
Okay. Now, if you think back a little bit over that sailing back and forth you were doing in the Pacific and between the islands and the ports, are there particular events or people that you remember that kind of stand out in your memory?
Well, you know, some of the islands were so backward that the clothes they wore were just mainly shorts.
Mm-hmm.
And the men and women and children. There wasn't a lot of clothes. Shoes were unheard of. They just didn't wear shoes. Well, they didn't need them.
Mm-hmm.
It was sand. It was, and they still had huts. Now that's in a lot of the small villages I'm talking about. And most of the islands did not have big cities. They were villages. Some were huge villages, but they were still villages. And there was nothing like a paved road. Trails, walking trails mainly, and sometimes you would have a wide enough for a cart to go through, a horse and buggy. But mostly in the islands, it was just dirt trails. Yeah, there was no pavement.
Okay. Now, when you were on the ship or on shore, did they provide any kind of entertainment for you? I mean, what could you do when you were off duty?
On the ship, well, actually on our ship, it was a small ship. We had a movie projector, but we didn't use it often. Most of the time, it was fellowship, playing cards, and after the war, we would have beer on the ship. We could get a couple beers every now and then, but not often. But now for 17, 18, 19-year-olds, a couple of beers is a great evening.
Right.
You know? You stop and visit and talk and sit and have a big evening.
Okay. Did they feed you well?
The food wasn't bad. Well, actually, I was storekeeper. I was kind of in charge of the food.
Okay.
So I tried to make sure that we had decent food all the time. And beer on the ship as often as we could get it. And but our food wasn't bad. We had fairly decent food.
Now, was it possible for you to do kind of negotiating or horse trading with the various suppliers to find ways to get better stuff?
Well, no, because our supply ships were all Navy controlled. And for a crew of 117 men, you were allowed so much beef, so much potatoes, so much of this, so much of that. And that's what they allowed you, not what you asked for. But anyway, it worked out good, and the food was not bad. Not bad at all. It was edible, and we all survived on it.
Now, did you spend much time at all on bases on shore? And if you go to the Philippines and unload or something?
No, we didn't. Usually when we went ashore, it was for a evening, and back on the ship by midnight or so forth, or by 7 o'clock reveille. You had to be back a certain time, but usually that was it on the foreign shores.
Okay. Now, as you're getting to some of these places and they've got civilians, they'll have women and things like that. Did guys get in trouble chasing local women or that sort of thing?
Guys, they're going to look at the women naturally, and but no problems really. No.
Was the discipline on your ship pretty good? I mean, did
Oh,
the men
yes.
follow orders? Yeah.
Yes, it was good. We had some pretty good officers. Most of them were young, like the ensigns and lieutenants. They're usually younger fellas. A lot of them just out of college, and they were younger fellas. Of course, when they're 24 years old out of college, they're a lot older than 17, 18, 19-year-olds. So they were our superiors, and they were pretty good guys. most of them.
Okay. Now, did you still have your second captain, your old salt captain at that point?
We had a salt captain, and he was a good guy though, but he was strict. He wanted his way, which was all right if it's a good way. But no, we had a very good. Our second captain was very excellent. Yeah.
Now, was there a point when you were wondering when you would ever get to go home?
Well, you know, after about a year and a half or so, you're thinking, hey, and it was time, but the guys all thought, boy, it'd be nice to get home, and you're looking for mail all the time. After you're there a year or so, it gets old, year and a half, and you're lonesome. You get lonesome. Everybody does.
Now, did you get a lot of letters from home?
Oh yes, yeah, yes. I had very fortunate. I was very fortunate. I had a girlfriend and her parents and sisters and brothers that wrote me all the time. Yes, it was very, very good.
Now, how regularly did you get mail when you were on the ship?
Oh, if we were near the big islands and so forth, we'd get mail probably every 5 or 6 days. But sometimes we'd go a month without mail, you know, sometimes month and a half, but not often. Usually it was once a week. We were fortunate, and they had ships that come in too that, hey, they got mail for all you guys today. 5 or 6 ships, you know, they'd all get mail one time, yeah.
Okay. Are there other particular memories or things that kind of stand out in your mind that you haven't brought in here yet?
Well, when we stood watch at night, we always had the glasses, but we always had to scan the horizon for ships and so forth. And we'd always spot the mines. The Japanese had a lot of mines, especially around the islands. And we'd always have to sink those mines. Otherwise, they'd sink you.
Right.
But we sank a lot of Japanese. I bet we sunk 40 or 50 of them in 2 or 3 months, you know.
How would you sink a mine?
We'd shoot them,
Okay.
yeah. We'd get within range, a couple 100 yards away. Because, hey, if you hit them, they'd blow a hole in the ship. They were quite powerful.
Now, did you ever have any scares about Japanese submarines?
Japanese subs, they reported Jap subs a few times, but we never did see any, you know, or periscopes or anything.
Right. Did you see any aircraft?
Oh yes, yeah, we saw Japanese aircraft quite often. In fact, they'd come over at night every now and then. Yeah, some nights we'd see them 2, 3 times a night. But they didn't bother, like I say, if there's a cruiser or a couple destroyers over here, they wouldn't bother a LST because they knew that they were smart. This ship was just hauling supplies. This ship had the troops on board, and a cruiser or a destroyer, well, they were destructive ships. They were going to hurt us, so they were going to get them out of the way. Where we had 20 millimeter and 40 millimeter guns, the cruisers had 8-inch guns, and the destroyers had 5-inch guns, which were pretty good weapons. So they knew the difference, and that's how they played their game. They were going after the destructive.
Now, did you ever see them attack any ships?
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Oh yeah, we saw them drop bombs. In fact, one of the LSTs next to us got hit one night. He was anchored about 100 yards away. Boy, they had a few people hurt, but the ship was okay. Just, yeah.
Now, were these just small raids, like one plane at a time, or a few planes?
1 or 2 or 3, yes, yeah. It's just small, not no big convoys, no big. Now this happened quite often. A stray plane or 2 would come through and drop a couple bombs and be on their way. And we'd usually shoot at them, but I don't think we ever hit any of them.
Okay. What do you think was maybe your scariest moment on the ship? Was it weather or the Japanese or what?
Weather was we had a typhoon at Okinawa, and that lasted, for a couple of days, and I'll tell you, oh boy, rough.
Yeah. Did you stay at anchor while this was going over, or you
we
go
were
to
at sea.
Okay.
We were just off Okinawa, maybe 100 miles off, and oh boy, That typhoon was terrible.
Okay. Now, when do you actually get to go home?
Well, I'll tell you, I don't remember just when I boarded, but I boarded a ship. It was an AD-9. It was commissioned in 1909. It was a sailing vessel converted to a diesel.
Okay.
And it took us about 40 days to get to San Francisco from where we left from.
About how many men do you think were being carried on it?
Oh, we had probably 400 or 500 men on board that ship. We were all going home, you know. And, oh boy, it took us a long while to get home. Well, we played cards all the way home. And they had good food. They had good food on that ship. But it was an old ship.
Okay.
But it got us there.
Now, where did you land in the States?
We landed in San Francisco. Yeah, under the Golden Gate Bridge, yeah.
And then what did they do with you once you landed?
Well, we were at camp there. We got leave. We got weekend passes, and I had cousins in San Jose, so I went down to San Jose and spent a few days there with my cousins and came back, and pretty soon they put us on a train, headed east, headed to Great Lakes, Illinois. So when we went through Las Vegas, Nevada, the train stopped. We said, how long are we going to be here? They said, oh, a few hours. So a bunch of the guys ran off the train and went and got some beer in Las Vegas, Nevada, and brought it back on the train. So there we went on the train for a couple more days. Golly, I think it took us about 5 or 6 days from California to Illinois.
And then did they discharge you at Great Lakes?
At Great Lakes, yes.
All right. And then did you go back home to Flint from there, or what did you
Yes.
do? Okay.
Yeah.
Now, you're back through all that. You've been discharged. Now, do you go back to school? Do you go to work? What do you do?
Well, I did go to school for a while. I went to Baker's Business College in Flint. I got a business degree after a year, and I was offered a job for $29 a week. So I went to see my brother-in-law at a warehouse in Flint. He said, oh golly, he said, don't take that job. That's not enough pay. So golly, I went to work driving a truck. I was making like $50, $60 a week to start with. Of course, I worked 40 or 50 hours too, not 29 or whatever. But I didn't take the job after going to school for a year. But I worked at this warehouse part-time anyway. So I went back there and was making the money instead of the business job. But I did get that business education, and it was good. It was good. It was helpful.
Now, did you stay in trucking or warehousing, or what did you do?
I worked for the warehouse for years, yes, for several years. And then I bought a rig and went on the road hauling freight to the East Coast. I bought my own truck and started doing that after. But I worked for Central Wholesale off and on for years. It was in the food business. It was. In fact, I've worked in the food business for years. In fact, I had a party store for 30 years in Lemon.
Okay. How did you wind up over here on the western side of Michigan?
How did what?
How did you wind up here? You're in Middleville.
Well, we live in Flint, so golly, my parents lived there for all these years, and I met my wife. Her and her father, they owned a grocery store. I was delivering groceries to their store, and I met my wife. Well, I started dating her, and pretty soon we got married. But I met her in the store, in the food business. Yeah, I was delivering groceries to her parents' store.
Now, when you look back at the time that you spent in the Navy, what effect do you think that had on you, or what did you learn from it?
Well, I did see a lot of the world. I saw quite a bit of the world, probably more than most people would. But anyway, it was an education. I learned a lot. And who would think today, with cars that go 100 miles an hour, you would go to a village and they don't know what a car is. They'd never seen a car or even heard of it. And this was common in the islands. You say the automobile, and you would talk to somebody that's educated in the islands and tell, oh, these cars, they can go 100 miles per hour. I said, you can drive from here to Shanghai, China in 2 hours from here. And they would look at you with disbelief. They couldn't believe that there's such a thing. Well, listen, these islands, they're still probably 50 years behind the modern countries. Now, third world countries are coming along now after the war, but before the war, so many spots in the world didn't even know what automobiles were. And gas stations, they don't know what those are. Convenience stores, supermarkets. There's so many places in the world that this is new. They don't know what it is. It's unbelievable to you mention this and people look at what are you talking about? What?
All right. So it was an education for you then?
Yes, it was an education.
All right. Well,
A good education in a way. It was scary sometimes, but it was still part of the education.
all right. Well,
And hey, we lived through it and didn't even get scratched. So we're very fortunate there. A lot of them lost limbs and oh boy.
right. All right. Well, it makes for a good story. So I'd like to close out here by thanking you for taking the time to tell it to me today.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
All right. And that's all right.